All right, Revelation chapter 13. I'm hoping we'll have some time to give you an opportunity to ask some questions on this. We're only going to look at the first 10 verses, but it is without a doubt steeped in Old Testament references, and so it's necessary to take a look at some of those things. To catch you up, since it's been 2 or 3 weeks since we've looked at this, remember that chapter 12 is a pivotal point in the book of Revelation. And I think about, and you need to always think about, this is a letter, and there were 7 of them that were given to the 7 churches of Asia, and the reader of the church has been reading this to the congregation. I don't know if they did it all in one session or not. Certainly would be easy to do that, but I'm sure it took them a lot more sessions to discuss it and go back and look at this. So you can imagine up to chapter 12, they were probably trying to figure out, man, what is behind all this? What is this all about? The judgments that he rendered against the physical nation of Israel. And then he comes to that pinnacle point in chapter 12 when the mystery of God that was spoken of in Daniel is completed concerning Israel. And then he mentions that John actually has John eat a scroll and says you've got more to prophesy about. And that's when chapter 13 now comes in, and we learn about the beast. And he was mentioned in chapter 12, but only briefly, or chapter 11, only briefly. And now we learn about this beast and who he is that rises up out of the sea. So Satan, or the dragon, or the serpent, however you want to refer to him, in Revelation talks about him in all those ways. He is calling a beast up out of the sea, and then he also calls up a beast out of the earth later in this same chapter. And we'll discuss how that comes about. Now, the last thing we learned in Revelation 12 was that the dragon, the serpent, has been defeated. And not only does Jesus defeat him by his resurrection, but we also are able now to defeat him by the blood of the Lamb, the word of our testimony, and not loving our lives even to death. And so we now, with Jesus, stand victorious. However, the serpent is not destroyed yet. His head has been crushed, and he's going to die, so to speak, in the sense that he's going to be separated from forever in the lake of fire, as we'll see in chapter 20. But in the time being, he is absolutely furious that he has lost the battle. And so he is going out, and you see that in verse 17 of chapter 12, he is going out making war against the woman and against her offspring, against the saints and those who obey the commandments of God. So tell me something, the war still going on? That's a big duh. That's really obvious. You don't have to be a genius to figure that one out by what is going on and has been going on in our world around us. So that's the introduction. Now, before, we've just had the reading of chapter 13, 1 through 10. Hopefully you spotted some of the things there. Let's quickly go back to Daniel 7, because everything that is in chapter 13, the first 10 verses, is borrowed from chapter 7 of the book of Daniel. So let's skip back to Daniel right quick, and we'll take a look at the vision that Daniel has. And so we'll spot some things very quickly here. Guess I could turn this on. So we have this picture of the beast rising out of the sea. I've just labeled the dragon's last gasp. He is just cast down, and now this is his last try to be successful. All right, in chapter 7, let's just notice first off the 4 beasts that are mentioned here. You see in 7, 1 through 8, the 4 beasts, and the 4th one is going to be a terrifying and dreadful one. Notice in verse 2, Daniel declared, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. First note, this is a sea picture again, just like we see in Revelation 13. We missed just the very ending of chapter 12, 17, where it said, and he stood on the sand of the sea, and the beast came up. So we'll see that a little more carefully in a second. But you see this sea picture, and then verse 3, and four great beasts came up out of the sea, different from one another. I'm going to quick this because most of you probably saw this when we studied the book of Daniel. But just notice verse 4, there is one that's like a lion who has eagle's wings. Verse 5, there's another beast like that has is like a bear raised up on one side. That's the Persian Empire. And then in verse 6, there's one like a leopard. Babylon, Persia, now Greece, yes. Verse 6, another like a leopard with four wings, bird on its back. So there's the Greek Empire. Then verse 7, notice this, and after this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast, terrifying and dreadful, exceedingly strong. It had great iron teeth. It devoured and broke in pieces, and stomped what was left with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. And I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another horn, a little one, before which 3 of the first horns were plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Okay? So we see the beginning of this, and the four beasts and the terrifying, dreadful beast at the end. We're going to see that terrifying, dreadful beast is parallel to the beast that we read about in Revelation 13. And then 9 through 14, you'll see judgment that is given to the beast. And this is when we see in verse 9, as I looked, thrones were placed, the Ancient of Days took his seat, his clothing was white as snow, and the hair of his head like pure wool. His throne was fiery flames, the wheels were burning fire. A stream of fire came out from before him. Thousands and thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment. The books were open. And then we see, of course, this judgment scene. I looked then, because of the sound of the great words, that the horn was speaking, and as I looked, the beast was killed and its body destroyed, given over to the burned with fire. As for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So we're seeing judgment on the horn, judgment on the beast, even though their power lingers a little bit longer. And then we see the coming of Jesus, 13 and 14. I saw in the night visions, behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like the Son of Man. Acts 1 picture, Jesus ascending. And he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. Dominion is an everlasting dominion, should not pass away. The kingdom one which should not be destroyed. So we find the judgment and the victory that Jesus then has, and that's what we saw in Revelation 12. Okay, so there's that picture, and then in 7:15 through 22, Daniel gives the interpretation of this. An angel gives this to him. Verse 17, notice specifically these four beasts are four kings who rise out of the earth. Now when you see four kings, each king epitomizes the kingdom. It's not like each of these nations or kingdoms only had one king, but he's saying that later in the text. He actually mentions that they are kingdoms, like verse 23 says a fourth kingdom. So there's four kings or kingdoms that come up. Verse 18, but the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom, possess the kingdom forever and ever and ever. So even though there's these four kingdoms, eventually God's kingdom and the saints will rule over those. Verse 19, then I desired to know the truth about the fourth beast, which was different from all the rest, exceedingly terrifying, with his teeth and iron claws of bronze, which devoured, broke in pieces, and stamped what was left, and about the 10 horns that were on its head, and then the other horn that came up before the and before which 3 of them fell, the horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. And I looked, this horn would made war with the saints and prevailed over them until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High, and the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. Okay, so let's just stop and talk about that a little bit. You have 10 horns representing 10 kings, or 10 kingdoms here. The 10 horns on his head, and you'll see these are later talked about as 10 kings. Verse 24, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and then another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. Now, just discuss that just a little bit. This is the most complicated part of Daniel and the most complicated part that you see in Revelation, but the two talk about the same thing. So, how many heads did you see in Revelation 13 on the beast that rose up? You may remember? What did you say, Becky? Yeah, 7 heads. And then there's another one that's going to rise up. There's going to be another one that's going to come up, and you can see that in chapter 17. He's going to mention those 7 heads, and then there's going to be an 8th that is going to rise up, and the 8th is a nasty persecutor. Seeing parallel. So here we have 7 heads. We'll talk about when we get to chapter 17. It just so happens that matches Augustus Caesar all the way to Nero, 7. And then you have the rise of persecuting kings. Persecuting kings are relate to this horn here. And we'll mention these 3 that fell in front of him in just a moment. So I'm just trying to get in your mind. I know right now you're going, okay, what? I don't know if I understand that. Okay, well, we're going to clarify. I just want you to be aware of what's there, okay, in the text. So the 10, in 23, he says, as for the 4th beast, there shall be a 4th kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the other kingdoms, and it shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break it in pieces. All right, that's not, we've talked about that before, but if you're new to this, that's not hard, because if you're in Babylon's day when Daniel is writing, you have Babylon kingdom, Persian kingdom, Greek kingdom, Roman kingdom. Roman kingdom's the 4th empire. And it's a real terrifying, nasty one that goes about trampling everybody underfoot and even begins to persecute the saints. Verse 24, as for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the former ones. So all that means is you got these 10 kings that arise, but then there's going to be one that's going to come up different from the previous. So you would know this. The beginning emperors were not much on persecuting Christians. That didn't really take place. Jesus was born in the midst of that. Book of Acts, we learned that the Romans were actually protecting Christians against the Jewish persecution. So we're not seeing that. Then there rises another that's different. And that doesn't mean it's one king. It just means there's a different set of them that are all the same, that rise up and persecute. By the way, persecution in the Roman Empire starts on a limited basis with Nero in Rome itself, but then expands to the rest of the kingdom with the reign of Domitian, who reigned between 81 and 96 AD. He doesn't really start his reign with much persecution that we know of, but he does do it. And then it continues off and on with emperors all the way till 313 BC. There are periods during that time where Christianity flourished, and you have emperors that rise up that don't really push it much. But there's parts of the empire that seem to have persecution a lot and consistently, and most of that is around Asia Minor, where the 7 churches are. So being aware of that, you can even get an idea why God wrote these letters in the beginning, this to the 7 churches, and have it passed around. So verse 25, notice what this little horn that rises up. He shall speak words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and he shall think to change the times and the law, and they shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. So we just read in Revelation 13, how long is the persecution going to go? 42 months, right? 42 months, same thing. 42 months, time, times, and half a time, 1,260 days, 3.5 years. All these things are the exact same thing, a period of time of yuckiness where there's all kinds of persecution. All right, verse 26, but the court shall sit in judgment, his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. Now watch verse 27, and the kingdom, the dominion, and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High. That still hasn't really happened yet for us. There's one that I'd say is not fulfilled. The dominion, but that's what Hebrews 2:5 said, that the world to come, we are to have dominion over the world to come. So there is that picture. And then his kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and all dominion shall serve and obey him. So there's the complete restoration that we are looking for. Any questions about Daniel 7 here and what we just talked about? Making you familiar with the vision itself. Okay? All right. So now we can concentrate a little bit more about the parallels in Revelation 13 here. I'll catch up a little bit. We've mentioned all of those. Okay, and then did I mention these? Yeah, diverse beasts is the 4th kingdom, 10 horns, 10 kings, 11th rising up. The horn will wear out the saints, times, and half a time. God will judge and destroy the horn and also the beast. And then the dominion and greatness of the kingdom will be given to the saints. All right, so there's that picture. Now let's go over and go from there and see the rise of the sea beast in chapter 13. So the very end of chapter 12, this is not a great, I never say this, chapter division. But you can see, and he stood on the sand of the sea. The he there references back to the dragon. So he goes to the sand of the sea, and there's the dragon, and then I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. And there's that picture. If you're reading the Old King James Version, it alludes to John standing on the sea, but that they filled in a blank there. That's not the way the manuscripts come out. So the dragon is standing on the sea. It seems that he just calls up then this beast out of the sea, and the beast is going to become one of the allies of the dragon. Dragon's going to use him. All right, and then you notice what he looks like. He looks like the 4th beast. Who else does he look like when you read the words 10 horns, 7 heads, and 10 diadems? Yeah, he looks like the dragon himself. That's right. You saw a picture of him back in chapter 12, and he looks just like the dragon. So the dragon is going, watch me reproduce this. And he then has this beast. Now, I would like to mention that isn't it interesting that God calls these empires and describes them as beasts? In 2 Peter chapter 2, when the Lord speaks about, through Peter, when the Lord speaks about people who are against God, he calls them irrational animals, or the King James calls them brute beasts, unreasoning people. I thought that was very, very interesting. They are unreasoning. They're like an animal. They just go by the seat of their pants. Whatever their desire is, that's what they do. Unreasoning, brute, irrational animals. There's God's picture. I wouldn't recommend you give a speech before Congress on that one, but you know. but I think some of them would go amen, and that'd be all right. But that's isn't it interesting that he's describing them as brute animals, and he's describing as animals that eat and destroy and consume. So you're getting a picture of how God sees these particular kingdoms. All right? And so there's no doubt about that. Let's be reminded that this is exactly what was prophesied in the book of Psalms. Why do the nations rage and the peoples plot vain? The kings of the earth set themselves and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. What's this all about? Nothing's changed. The battle is still on, and who's doing the battle? Kings, rulers, peoples. They are all in cahoots to destroy God's kingdom. They want to reign. They want their ways to be superior. They want their ways to conquer. And this is all what Satan, the dragon, is doing behind the scene, because the dragon is trying to conquer. The dragon wants to murder us, and he wants to destroy the earth realm that God has created, so it does not fulfill what God desired for it to fulfill. And he did that in the very beginning, trying to get Adam and Eve to sin, because he knew if they sinned, boom, God has to kill them. They have to die. And so God's redemption, of course, I'm sure surprised him, but that is the picture then that is taking place, and we need to keep that then before us. All right, notice how Satan imitates God. I don't know if you noticed that in the text. Satan is the great imitator, and whatever God does, Satan tries to do the same thing to show the world, I'm just like him, I can do the same thing. And so, for example, you see Satan calling up his allies. And we haven't read about the earth beast, but he's the earth beast on down there in verse 11. So he raises two allies. The sea beast, which represents governments, and then the earth beast, which is later called the false prophet. He's a religious beast. He looks like a lamb, but when he opens his mouth, it sounds like a dragon. Deception, okay? Just like Jesus said, wolves in sheep's clothing were false prophets, and he's later called the false prophet. So he calls up his allies. When you look at chapter 14, after Satan does what he does, we're introduced to God's allies. The lamb. Who's the other ally? The lamb is one ally. Who's the second ally? You glance to chapter 14. Yeah, the saints. 144,000 that we're introduced to back in chapter 7, who are the complete picture of God's saved people. So his allies to battle Satan is the Lamb and us. So we need to always keep that picture before our minds, because we have our identity there and our purpose in that. Another is Satan's two beasts reflect him. What do we? How does God create us? He recreates us to reflect him. One of the beast's heads receives a mortal wound but survives. What had God already done and through Jesus? Received the mortal wound and yet is resurrected. Satan goes, I can do that. And so we'll talk about what that is in just a second. And then all who dwell on the earth marvel and worship the beast, because the beast came back to life. And we marvel at Jesus and worship him. That is already was in place before the serpent does this. And so there's these imitations. And this is not unusual with Satan. He is very predictable. When God has in the Old Testament one great prophet like Elijah, what does Satan do? Oh, he's got 800 prophets with Ahab. Oh, I can do prophets. I can do a lot of prophets. And so it's always that way with the plagues of Egypt. You know, Moses does a plague, and Pharaoh's magicians, they go, oh, I can do that. You know, and then they get to the point where they can't do that, and they go, wait a minute. This must be from God. So that's the picture you're getting. The heads of the beast and the mortal wound. Well, let's figure out what that is first off. Now, to have a mortal wound and one of the heads are the kings, 7 kings. If you have one of the heads that dies, then there's a threat to the kingdom itself. It's not like the United States, where if you have a president dies, we have somebody else that's ready to come in and take over. But with the reign of the Roman Empire, you have one die and the whole empire is thrown into disarray, because who's going to rule? And that is exactly what happened historically, and we'll show how that was. But just as in the horns of Daniel, the beast's heads are kings, and one of them is killed. So this is a death of an emperor, and this relates, apparently, I mean, it's, we're looking back and be able to identify this one spot. Remember, there were, of the 10 in Daniel, 3 fell, and that leaves how much? 7? Okay, just put a few of that together there. So when you put that together, you have a picture of the civil war that arose when Nero died. So Nero dies June 9th, AD 68, and it throws the empire into turmoil. Vespasian is already surrounded Jerusalem with his armies and is trying to conquer Jerusalem, which it takes 2.5 years for that to happen. But when Nero dies, then there's this battle for power, and you have 3 emperors. By the way, the year from June 68 to 69 is called the year of 4 empires. So you have Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, and then Vespasian wins. But the first 3 are either the 2 of them are murdered and the third one commits suicide. Now, all this happens in 1 year. So fast that many in the empire don't even know when there were changes. They couldn't dial in NBC and find that out. But word gets out later on. So eventually, Vespasian actually, with great battle, is able to take over, and he sends Titus back to Jerusalem to finish Jerusalem off. So this is all happening to 68 to 70 AD. So what you see is it appears, and it appeared to the populace, that Rome was in big trouble. Is it going to be able to survive without an emperor? And there's battles for power. And it was in great danger of falling. And then Vespasian comes in and he solidifies the empire, gets everybody back on track, stabilizes everything, and everybody's marveling. Wow, we have the resurrection of one of the heads, or the resurrection of the empire itself. Now, notice verse 6. It opened its mouth, so here is this beast that's risen up, and is now exercising authority for 42 months. During that 42 months, quote unquote, it opened its mouth and uttered blasphemies against God, and blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. And notice where his blasphemy goes. Even those in heaven. So he's just throwing that out, destroying what heaven is. He hates them. He hates anybody who serves God. And then verse 7 says he was also allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them, and have authority given to him over every tribe, people, language, and nation, and all who dwell on earth will worship him. Everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb who was slain. So let's talk about now the characteristics of this beast. He speaks great blasphemies, even against those in heaven, against those who serve God in heaven, and those who serve God on earth. He is blaspheming everything that God stands for here. So let's think about how that happens. Blasphemies come out of his mouth, for one thing. So they are against everything God stands for and against His Word, against what He teaches. So Mark's account, Mark chapter 8, verse 38, Jesus says, "Whoever's ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him will the Son of Man also be ashamed when He comes in the glory of His Father with the holy angels." Goofed up there on that period. But at any rate, when he does that, so ashamed of His words. Okay, here is the first major way that people are going to worship the beast. They are not going to stand for the teachings of Jesus. And they're going to blaspheme those teachings as being foolish and dumb and whatever, and they're going to put pressure on people to give up that teaching. You see that today? That's pretty easy, pretty plain. It is something in which they are defying all the moralities that God has laid out. And that happened in the Roman Empire. They don't like it that Christians are changing the culture. Why did Paul get beat up every time? You're changing the culture of this city. People aren't worshiping the idols, and people aren't giving godlike power to the emperor. And so all of that then reverberates and brings about this persecution. They hate what they're teaching. They hate the culture that they live in and what the culture they produced, because it changes everything. Now take a look at 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. Chip in his teachings on Sunday morning made reference to this and said, well, we'll bypass that and let Barry deal with it when he comes to Revelation. Well, he hit the nail on the head, because that's exactly what you see here as a parallel into 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. So 2 Thessalonians 2, they had been getting a letter, apparently a letter from somebody else, like the end was here and Jesus had already returned and all of that. So verse 3, 2 Thessalonians 2, "Let no one deceive you in any way, for that day," talking about the day of the Lord, "will not come unless the rebellion comes first, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God." So what Paul says is before the Lord returns, this man of lawlessness is going to be revealed. He's described, if you picture him, he's a lawless ruler. He takes his power. He believes he's the God who can give all power and authority to, and he proclaims himself as God, sits in the temple of God. It just so happens that there are Roman cult emperor temples all over the empire. Philippi has it. Some of those 7 churches of Asia have it. And so this is who he is. And notice verse 5. "Do you not remember that when I was still with you, I told you these things? And you know what is restraining him now, so that he may be revealed in his time. For the mystery of lawlessness is already at work." All right, now that's really important, because Paul is saying this isn't something you're looking for in the 19th century, the 20th century, or whatever century. This is already at work. It's ready to be revealed. It's ready to happen. I don't think there's any way to miss that this is talking about then when the Roman Empire flips to these emperors who require honor and worship, and there is absolute authority over every human being if they do not do something, follow him. And so verse 8, "Then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth and bring to nothing by the appearance of his coming. The coming of the lawlessness is by the activity of Satan, just like the dragon, with all power and false signs and wonders," just like the earth beast. The false prophet does that in chapter 13, verse 11. Therefore God, verse 10, and with wicked deception for those who are perishing because they refuse the love of the truth to be saved, and God will even send them a strong delusion that they may believe what is false and all be condemned. So you see the parallel here that was already mentioned by Paul. This wouldn't have been surprise then to the first century Christians. Okay? So you can see that parallel there. Any questions about that part? You following that okay? If you're not following, tell me and I'll say it again or something. All right? You good? Okay, so then going from there, let's just make some applications and conclusions in our last few minutes here. All right? So first off, we're going to look at verse 9 and 10, but we'll see that at the end because I want you to get the impact of how he does it. First off, this message, we need to remember, goes beyond the Roman Empire. As we do with all Bible books, there are applications for future generations. And so it is with Revelation. Why did he leave this for us to read if this is just things that happened in the past? It's not. It's things that continue to repeat itself. Just like Old Testament events repeats themselves in an escalated way in New Testament events, so this is true too. So look at the broader picture here. When a government follows the pattern of the Roman Empire and follows the pattern of the beast, it then is fulfilling what this beast becomes too. And it fulfills Psalm 2, where the rulers and authorities and kings of the earth battle against God for absolute authority. And we have, if you're any kind of historian, you've read nations that are like that. Most recent are nations like Hitler and Mao Zedong and many others like it. Russia's had their share, Stalin and Lenin, where they have absolute authority and going to destroy anybody who does not give them absolute honor as a god. And it's even though they wouldn't even call themselves a god, that's the way they are acting. So we see that very clearly. If it fits the profile, then it's like if the glove fits, it's you. Yeah, you did it. All right. This, I think, is interesting just in the evolution of our country in my lifetime. We used to talk about politics. We talked about things about, I don't want to vote for him. He's going to raise the taxes. Well, I like it that he raises the taxes because then we get some things, and there's this little debate that goes on, and that was the way politics used to be discussed, was these kind of patterns, which is the reason that most of us preachers, we just kept politics out of the pulpit. I mean, look, you like a tax guy, go right ahead. I don't, but if that's what you want, be my guest, and we might have those things. But politics is not what's going on here anymore. Now, when we talk about politics, we're actually talking about things that openly violate God's laws and openly go against God. So now it has come to the point, we're not talking about I just like that guy better than this guy. We were talking this morning, Nigel was talking about Saul being good looking and all that. And my first thought was, and most of you aren't old enough to know this, but my first thought was, that's the reason Kennedy beat Nixon, is he had the first television debate and Nixon looked horrible. He's dripping sweat and they started calling him Tricky Dick and the whole thing. And of course, John Kennedy looked great. I mean, he was smooth and everything. He wasn't dripping sweat and etc. Nixon had a bad habit of having a whole lot of sweat right under his nose. And it just looked awful, the poor guy. If you listen to it on radio, everybody said Nixon wiped it clean. He just killed him. But he lost because he looked bad. Well, that's just kind of the interesting thing about all of that. Well, that's the way we talked and we voted, etc. But things have changed. since that time. And COVID helped it along, and most of you know that, where certain government officials, mayors and governors and things, realize I can this go, executive order, you all have to do everything I tell you to do, and you have no choices whatsoever. You can't meet in churches, you can't do this, you can't do that, and on it went. Many of those, by the way, fortunately, have gotten whacked after that, and the government came down on them for doing that as unconstitutional. Yippee. I was actually a little surprised that worked. I don't think it's going to stop them when the time comes, but it is the beginnings of saying we can be the God around here. And in some states and in some counties, that same thing is true. I don't know if you noticed, but California has just passed a law that kids that go to school and choose to be a different gender than their birth, that the school district can hide that from the parents. And that's perfectly acceptable. So now you're seeing things that are violating a lot of God's morality, obviously, and there's many other things. Corporations and military have been threatened, or people even dismissed, if they don't celebrate pride and celebrate this and that and all these crazy things. And so now we have elected leaders who are saying that those who object to this new morality are, quote, threats to democracy and threats to America. Wow. Those are strong, strong words. And they're the ones that are the threat. I had to go back and just remind myself this afternoon. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. The Declaration of Independence begins that way. And wait a minute. People who stand for morality are not a threat to democracy. We're not a threat to a dictatorship, for that matter. We're not a threat to anybody. Leave us alone and let us serve God. And we're not a threat to anybody. And even if you don't, we're still not a threat to you. We're just going to have to do what God says first. And that is then the idea. I want you to notice just a couple of quotes here I thought were very good. My son Scott said this, and I thought it was very insightful. He says, Rome's practice of deifying its emperors is reflected here as the earth worships the beast and as the beast utters haughty and blasphemous words. At first, it may seem quite strange to us that the emperor might consider himself to be a god, or that people would believe such a thing. But it is vital to understand that the emperor cult worship was less about religion and more about politics. And Gordon Fee's going to explain that this way, talking about the power of the tree. He says, part of the adhesiveness of the empire had been made possible by the cult of the emperor, which was the primary reason, thus political rather than religious, for it to exist in the first place. It is in fact highly unlikely that the emperor took himself seriously as a god. Nonetheless, he was quite willing to have temples built in his honor, and thus for the cult of the emperor to flourish. After all, such divinity was to his advantage. So when you whittled it all down, what was it about? Power. It didn't have anything to do with religion. It didn't have anything to do with that. It was about power. Look behind the curtain and find who's pulling the strings, and it's usually about power and wanting to have power. Why in the world some people want to have that kind of power, I'll never know, but that's just the way they are. And it again reminds us of Psalm chapter 2. Look at these words that reflect that. Acts 17:6, and when they could not find them, that is Paul and his companions, they dragged Jason and some of the brothers before the city, authorities shouting, "These men who have turned the world upside down have come here also, and Jason has received them, and they are all acting against the decrees of Caesar, saying there's another king, Jesus." And the people and the city authorities were disturbed when they heard these things. Somebody's being undemocratic. Somebody is forcing that. So anyway, the point of that is the dragon is doing what? Like he's always done. The dragon tries to take control of government for his benefit to destroy God's people. And when you see some of the weirdest decisions and decrees and decisions even by corporations on the face of the earth. I about threw up this afternoon when I haven't watched any of the Olympics, and I now will not watch 2 seconds of it now, as they started the Olympics with a woman in the middle dressed like, making a mockery of Jesus with this thing over her head, and the 12 apostles who are all drag queens. That's how they started. And a transgender woman who's doing an activity before that. Thank you, France. Good job. See, this is spitting in God's face. That's all that is. It's just saying, watch, if that doesn't fit the word blasphemy, somebody's going to have to tell me what you'd have to do to make it blasphemy. That is the ultimate blasphemy. So, dragon, that's the idea. So, as my son Scott says, yeah, it's getting so weird, I just grabbed some popcorn. I cracked up. Well, yeah, that's just about the way it is. Relax and get some popcorn, because it's just going to happen, and not much you can do about it except stand strong and watch the scene. It's crazy about that. So the reason I say how far out that is who could be doing that but the dragon? Who could be doing that and planting this craziness in people's minds? That's the picture that is done here. All right, final thing. Who worships the beast? Everyone whose name's not written in the book of life. That's who worship the beast. We have to be careful. We don't worship even our country that we're so proud of in many ways, but not to cave in to those kinds of things. And then verses 9 and 10, pretty weird, isn't it? If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone's to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here's the call for the endurance and the faith of the saints. In other words, you may be chosen for death, you may be chosen for captivity. Whatever it is, relax. That's the endurance of the saints. It'll be all right. God will bring you through this. And so that is the great picture. Psalm 115, 1 through 8 is such a beautiful close to this. Why should the nations say, where is their God? Our God is in the heavens. He does all that he pleases. Their idols are silver and gold, the work of human hands. They have mouths but do not speak, eyes but do not see. They have ears, but do not hear, noses, but do not smell. They have hands, but do not feel, feet, but do not walk, and they do not make a sound in their throat. Those who make them become like them. So do all who trust in them. Follow the beast, you'll become a beast. Follow any idol, you become like the idol. And that is God's big warning. Okay, we're going to sing a song right now.